Karoline Leavitt wasted no time. "You've sold this country on lies, Alexandria," she began, her words cutting through the courtroom like a blade. The room went still as she stared at Alexandria with an intensity that was almost palpable. The air was thick with the unspoken tension between the two, their rivalry in full swing. Alexandria didn't flinch. If anything, she sat up straighter, her expression unreadable. She'd been in tough battles before, and she wasn't about to let Karoline get under her skin now. The audience, however, held their breath, knowing that whatever came next would not be a typical exchange. "Do you honestly believe your reckless policies have done any good? You're all talk, but when it comes to results, you've only fueled division," Karoline continued, her voice cold, calculating. The accusation was laced with contempt, designed to provoke, and the courtroom felt it. Alexandria met her gaze, her eyes unwavering. "If you think that my policies are division, then you've completely missed the point," she responded, her tone steady but sharp. "The real division in this country comes from people like you, who care more about maintaining power than about real progress. The progress we need isn't easy, Karoline, but it's necessary." The courtroom was silent, everyone sensing the shift in momentum. Karoline, used to dominating conversations, looked momentarily taken aback. The bluntness of Alexandria's response had knocked her off balance, but she quickly recovered. "Progress?" Karoline scoffed. "You call destroying jobs, inflating the cost of living, and pushing unrealistic policies progress. Your vision isn't progress. It's destruction." But Alexandria wasn't backing down. The intensity in her eyes only grew stronger. "What you fail to understand, Karoline, is that real progress doesn't happen when we cater to the rich and powerful. It happens when we prioritize people over profits. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you should take a hard look at what side of history you want to be on." The room fell deathly quiet. Every person in the courtroom was hanging on to Alexandria's words, feeling the weight of her conviction. Karoline tried to muster a response, but for the first time, she seemed to hesitate. Her usual sharp retorts felt inadequate, and she found herself caught off guard by the rawness of Alexandria's message. The judge glanced over, clearly aware of this seismic shift happening in the room. The crowd had begun murmuring in shock, some nodding in agreement, others visibly stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Karoline's smirk slowly faded, replaced by a tight-lipped frown as she realized the dynamic had changed. Alexandria's response had hit a nerve one Karoline wasn't prepared for. The power had shifted, and the courtroom now saw Alexandria not just as a congresswoman, but as a force to be reckoned with. "I didn't come here to play games, Karoline," Alexandria said, her voice firm yet measured. "I came here to make sure people like you understand that your time is running out. People are tired of the same old tactics. They're looking for solutions, and they're looking for leaders who aren't afraid to fight for them." As the words echoed through the room, Karoline's face hardened, but there was no denying the undeniable truth in Alexandria's words. The room buzzed with an energy that couldn't be ignored as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had not only stood her ground but had taken control of the conversation in a way that no one had expected. The audience, now rapt with attention, felt the tension dissolve into something electric. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a defining moment. Karoline had come in ready to attack, but Alexandria had flipped the script, delivering a message that resonated far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The unexpected power of Alexandria's response left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Karoline, for the first time, seemed to struggle to find her words. She had underestimated her opponent. And Alexandria, with her calm demeanor and unwavering confidence, had just delivered a blow that would echo far beyond this courtroom. The air in the courtroom felt thick, every person on edge, watching as Karoline tried to regain control. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping restlessly on the polished wood of the table in front of her. The audience could see her frustration mounting, the cracks in her poised exterior becoming more visible with every passing second. Alexandria had done what few before her had dared. She'd exposed the weakness in Karoline's attack, turning the conversation in her favor with an undeniable force. Karoline opened her mouth, ready to strike back, but the words seemed to get lost somewhere between her thoughts and her lips. Alexandria's presence, calm and assertive, had disrupted her rhythm. She cleared her throat, trying to reassert her confidence, but it felt less convincing now. Her sharp edges were dulling, and for a moment, she seemed to realize that this was no longer just a battle of words. It was a battle of convictions, of truth versus the carefully crafted image of her opponent. "I'm not here to be lectured on leadership," Karoline finally said, her voice rising slightly, though the tremor in it betrayed her frustration. "I'm here because I believe in a better future for America, and not the kind of future you're trying to sell. Your radical policies will only hurt the people you claim to protect. You've created a narrative of victimhood, Alexandria, and you want the rest of us to buy into it." Alexandria didn't budge. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, like the calm in the middle of a storm. "You're right," she said softly. "I've created a narrative. But it's not one of victimhood, it's a narrative of strength. A narrative of empowerment for those who've been ignored for far too long. And maybe that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe it doesn't fit into the neat little box you've built for yourself. But it's a narrative that's changing lives." There was a beat of silence. Karoline's lips pressed into a thin line, and the crowd could feel the tension escalate. Alexandria's words had hit harder than any personal attack could. She wasn't just defending her policies, she was defending the very people who had been left behind by the system Karoline championed. That was the crux of it all. And Karoline knew, deep down, that Alexandria's words weren't just aimed at her, they were aimed at everything she represented. How many more people will be hurt before you admit that your ideas are flawed? Karoline's voice was tight now, almost desperate, as though she was struggling to hold on to the last shred of control. How many families will lose their jobs? How many businesses will close? Your vision is nothing more than a fairy tale. Alexandria leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving Karoline's. "You can call it a fairy tale," she replied. "But the truth is, the fairy tale you're trying to sell isn't working. It's a tale where the rich get richer, and the rest of us just keep fighting for scraps. Your vision only works for the people who already have everything, people like you. But it doesn't work for those who have to choose between paying for healthcare and putting food on the table. You call that a fairy tale? Then I'll take the fairy tale every time." A ripple of murmurs ran through the courtroom as Alexandria's words landed. She had struck again, and this time, it was clear that the audience was on her side. The energy in the room shifted, there was no denying it. Karoline's attempts to frame Alexandria as out of touch were unraveling, thread by thread. With every truth, Alexandria spoke. Karoline's face darkened, her expression now one of cold determination. "I've seen the damage your kind of thinking does, Alexandria," she said, her voice low and measured, almost as if she were speaking to a child. "You talk about the people you're helping, but all you've done is fuel resentment and division. You're not the savior you think you are. You're part of the problem." Alexandria's lips curled into a slight smile, not one of arrogance, but of quiet confidence. "If fighting for people's rights makes me part of the problem, then I'll gladly wear that title. But what I won't do is sit by and let people like you continue to push policies that harm others. I won't stay silent while you use your power to keep people in the dark. And I won't let you define what's right for this country based on your narrow view of the world." Karoline's expression faltered for a split second. It was barely noticeable, but Alexandria saw it. The faintest flicker of uncertainty crossed Karoline's eyes before she quickly masked it. The tension in the room was suffocating now. Each word exchanged feeling like a duel between two very different worlds, one fighting to protect the status quo, the other pushing for a seismic shift. The crowd was riveted, hanging on every word. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about power, truth, and who could capture the moral high ground. Alexandria wasn't simply defending her ideas, she was embodying them. She wasn't just a politician speaking to the crowd. She was a symbol of the very change she advocated for, and the realization hit Karoline hard. "What do you expect from me, Alexandria?" Karoline's voice was laced with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "For me to apologize for wanting what's best for this country? For wanting to keep it strong? For wanting to protect our values? I can't be sorry for that." Alexandria's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the resolve in her voice. "I don't need you to apologize, Karoline. What I need is for you to listen. For once, to hear the people you've been ignoring. They don't need your empty promises. They need real solutions, real change, and they need it now." The words hung in the air, and for the first time since the exchange began, Karoline seemed to falter. She had no retort, no defense. Alexandria had turned the conversation into a reckoning, not just for Karoline, but for the entire country. The courtroom had shifted. The tides were turning, and Karoline's last-ditch attempt to cling to her narrative seemed weak in comparison to the strength of Alexandria's unwavering stance. The judge shifted uncomfortably in their seat, sensing the mounting pressure in the room. The applause was imminent, but no one dared make a sound. It wasn't just a political exchange anymore, it was a revelation. Karoline Leavitt had come into the courtroom with a clear intention: to crush Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But instead, Alexandria had turned the tables, showing that the power of truth and conviction could not be silenced. And as the seconds ticked by, the audience could feel the weight of this moment. This was more than a battle of words. It was a turning point, one that would resonate long after the courtroom doors closed. The room was electric. You could feel the undercurrent of tension as the silence stretched on, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of papers, the distant ticking of the clock, and the slow exhale of the audience holding their breath. Karoline sat rigidly in her chair, her jaw clenched tight, her knuckles white against the table. She had been rattled, no question about it. Alexandria had delivered a blow, and Karoline, for the first time in this battle, seemed unsure of how to respond. For a moment, Karoline glanced down at her notes, flipping through them with quick, desperate movements as though searching for something, anything that could give her the advantage again. But it wasn't there. No amount of prepared rhetoric could undo what had just happened. Alexandria's words were simple, yet potent, unmistakably grounded in reality, in truth, and in the fight for those who had been left behind by the systems, Karoline continued to defend. "I'm still waiting for an answer, Karoline." Alexandria's voice cut through the stillness, low but unmistakably commanding. "How do you justify a system that continues to leave people behind? How do you live with that?" The question was like a sharp needle, pricking at Karoline's carefully constructed defense. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Alexandria's gaze never wavered. She was the embodiment of calm, unflappable in the face of Karoline's frustration. It was clear now that Alexandria wasn't just fighting for her own beliefs. She was fighting for every person who had been disregarded by the powers Karoline championed. Karoline's lips tightened, but this time, there was no fire in her eyes, only something colder, sharper. "You think you've got all the answers, don't you?" She spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think you know what's best for everyone, but you're just pushing an agenda. You're out of touch with the real America. You want to tear down everything that's working just to build your version of utopia. And I'm telling you, it won't work." Alexandria's eyes softened just slightly, but there was a new steely determination in her tone. "I'm not trying to tear anything down, Karoline. I'm trying to rebuild a broken system. You may call it utopia, but I call it justice. I call it equality. I call it opportunity for everyone, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, or how much money they have. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe that's something you need to face." The words hit harder this time. The audience could sense the power shift, as if the momentum was no longer with Karoline. The truth, once again, was on Alexandria's side. It wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about human dignity. It was about basic rights, about giving a voice to the voiceless. Karoline had underestimated just how powerful Alexandria's resolve was, how deeply she believed in what she was fighting for. And now it was too late to back down. "Tell me, Alexandria," Karoline said, her voice laced with venom as she leaned forward, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. "What's your solution? What do you think you can really change with your policies? Because I'll tell you, this people don't want your handouts. They want jobs. They want to earn a living. And you're doing nothing but encouraging dependency." There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd, but Alexandria remained steady, her face unwavering. She was no longer playing Karoline's game. She wasn't going to let her make this about economic principles alone. This was bigger. It always had been. "People don't want handouts, Karoline," Alexandria replied, her voice carrying the weight of 100 conversations she'd had with struggling families. "They want access. They want health care that won't bankrupt them. They want education that doesn't leave them in debt for life. They want to feel safe, to know they have a future to look forward to. And your right people want to earn a living. But they also deserve to have the opportunity to do so." She paused, letting her words sink in. Karoline, still visibly rattled, opened her mouth to respond, but Alexandria didn't give her the chance. "And don't for a second think I'm not aware of the cost of change," Alexandria continued, her voice strong now, filled with the kind of quiet fire that comes from truly knowing your purpose. "But that's the thing, real change has never come without sacrifice. If we keep up with this fear-mongering, this business-as-usual mentality, we'll just keep spinning our wheels while more people fall through the cracks." It was impossible to ignore the shift. The crowd, which had once leaned towards Karoline's rhetoric, was now hanging on Alexandria's every word. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed from tension to something more profound, a sense of revelation, of truth piercing through the noise. Karoline had tried to paint Alexandria as naive, as someone out of touch with reality. But Alexandria wasn't naive. She was pragmatic. She was fierce. And she was refusing to back down. Karoline, however, was still trying to salvage her position. "You're just playing into people's emotions, Alexandria," she sneered. "That's all this is. You've got people believing in a dream that will never happen. And when it all falls apart, it'll be on your hands." But Alexandria wasn't fooled. She saw the cracks in Karoline's defense. She saw the cracks in the argument she was trying to make. This wasn't about ideology anymore. This was about a choice between compassion and greed, between standing up for the people who needed help and protecting the interests of those who already had too much. "Maybe it's time to stop talking about what's possible and start thinking about what's right," Alexandria said, her voice sharp but controlled. "Because in the end, that's what matters. Not your political games or your fear of what might happen. What matters is what we leave behind, what we leave for the next generation." Karoline's face tightened, her jaw twitching as though she were trying to hold on to whatever shred of control she had left. "You don't get it," she hissed. "You don't understand the people you're trying to help. You think they need your help, but they don't. They need to be left alone. They need to be allowed to pull themselves up, not rely on government handouts." Alexandria didn't flinch. She didn't need to. "I've seen the people I'm trying to help, Karoline," she said softly. "And I'll keep fighting for them. Because I believe they deserve better than what you're offering. And no matter how many times you try to twist my words or paint me as some kind of villain, the truth is simple. The people will always come first." It was a statement of finality, the kind that silenced all arguments. Karoline opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her words were hollow in comparison. She had nothing left to say. Nothing that could undo what Alexandria had just laid bare. As the judge called for a brief recess, the courtroom stood in stunned silence. The battle had been fought, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had emerged victorious. The audience, caught between disbelief and awe, knew one thing for sure: this moment would be remembered. It wasn't just a political debate, it was a turning point. And Karoline Leavitt, for all her talk, had just learned what true conviction looked like. The tension in the room was palpable as the brief recess ended and the judge returned to his seat, his gavel coming down with a sharp rap that signaled the continuation of the proceedings. The audience, still reeling from the intense exchange, settled back into their seats, casting curious glances at both women. Karoline, sitting rigid and unmoving, still seemed disoriented by the barrage of Alexandria's words. She wasn't just shaken. She was visibly flustered, her thoughts scattered. Alexandria, on the other hand, had composed herself with an air of calm assurance that seemed to infuriate Karoline even more. She had taken the hits, the insults, and the pointed accusations. Yet she had risen above them, choosing to counter with logic, with truth, and with the fire of someone who knew exactly why they were there. It was more than just a battle of words. It had become a fight for the very future of the country. The judge motioned for Karoline to continue her argument, and the room held its breath as she slowly straightened in her chair, her eyes narrowing in a steely glare. She'd lost some ground, but she wasn't going to surrender. Not yet. "I can't believe I'm hearing this," Karoline began, her voice laced with disbelief. "You talk about compassion, about fairness, about equality, but where do you draw the line? At what point do we stop coddling people and start holding them accountable for their own actions?" She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air. "You're advocating for a system where handouts are the norm, where everyone is given something without earning it. That's not how the world works, Alexandria. You're setting us up for failure." The air in the courtroom thickened with the weight of her words. Karoline's accusation was sharp, biting, but Alexandria wasn't thrown off course. She wasn't there to debate abstract political theory. She was there to defend the principle of human dignity. And she was going to make sure Karoline understood the difference. With a slow, deliberate motion, Alexandria stood. Her movements were purposeful, unhurried, as she walked to the podium, facing Karoline squarely. The room fell silent, the anticipation hanging heavy, as if everyone knew something significant was about to unfold. "I'm not asking for a system of handouts, Karoline." Alexandria's voice rang out, measured and steady, cutting through the tension. "I'm asking for a system that recognizes the inherent value of every person. A system that doesn't just look at someone's income or their status, but at their worth as a human being. A system where people aren't forced to choose between feeding their families or paying for the medicine they need to survive." Her words landed with a weight that couldn't be ignored. Karoline's eyes flickered, her breath caught in her throat, but she quickly recovered, trying to regain her footing. "You make it sound so simple," Karoline scoffed. "But the world isn't simple, Alexandria. You can't just wave a magic wand and make everything better. You can't force people to care. You can't make a broken system work by giving away free handouts." Alexandria smiled, not with condescension, but with a quiet, knowing understanding. "I'm not asking for a magic wand, Karoline. I'm asking for a vision that empowers people to stand up, to have the tools they need to succeed, and to be able to access the opportunities that everyone deserves." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "I'm talking about real structural change. The kind of change that doesn't just give people fish to eat, but teaches them how to fish so they can feed themselves and their families for generations to come." The courtroom was still. No one spoke. Karoline clenched her fists on the table, her face red with frustration. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. There was no denying the power of Alexandria's argument. It was grounded in something deeper than politics. It was grounded in the belief that every person deserved the opportunity to thrive, not just survive. We've had a system for decades that prioritizes the wealthy and the powerful. Alexandria continued, her voice growing stronger, more resolute with each word. And look where it's gotten us. The gap between the rich and poor has never been wider. The middle class is disappearing. And we're facing a crisis in healthcare, in education, in every aspect of our lives. And yet, Karoline, you want to keep things exactly the same, to let the cycle continue, because that's what's comfortable for you. Karoline's face twisted in anger. She couldn't fathom what Alexandria was proposing. I don't want to change things for the sake of change. I want to protect what we have. Our way of life, our economy, the way things work. If we tear down everything, what's left? What's left is the possibility of a better future for everyone. Alexandria shot back, her eyes never leaving Karoline's. A future where no one is left behind because of where they were born or what they can afford. That's what's left. That's what we're fighting for. For the first time, Karoline hesitated. Her grip on the argument was slipping, and she knew it. Alexandria had exposed the cracks in her beliefs, and they were wide enough to let the light of truth shine through. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't know how to fight back against the vision Alexandria had painted. A vision of a future where justice, opportunity, and equality weren't just ideals, they were the foundation of society. And in that moment, Karoline Leavitt knew that this wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about winning a debate. This was about something bigger, something that would shape the future. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest. The judge, sensing the change in the room, called for another recess. But this time, no one was in a hurry to leave. The battle wasn't over, but it had shifted. The stakes had been raised. And no one would be the same after today. The courtroom buzzed with the hum of low conversation as the recess ended. But this time, the tension was different. Something had changed. Karoline sat back in her chair, her jaw clenched tight, as if bracing herself for the next round. Her eyes narrowed as she looked across the room at Alexandria, whose calm demeanor remained unshaken. The balance of power had shifted. Karoline had thrown everything she had at Alexandria, but Alexandria's response had pierced through her defenses like a well-aimed arrow. And now, for the first time, Karoline didn't know how to proceed. The judge gave a nod, signaling the start of the final round. Karoline straightened up, eyes flashing with the fire of someone who knew this moment would determine everything. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come right away. Instead, she hesitated, her mind whirling. There was a crack in her confidence, and Alexandria had exposed it. Alexandria, noticing the shift, stood slowly. She didn't need to speak loudly, she had already made her point. Her presence alone commanded the room. The eyes of the audience were on her, waiting to hear what she would say next, but she wasn't interested in fighting anymore. She had already delivered the truth, and the truth had a life of its own. Instead of pushing further into the debate, Alexandria took a deep breath and addressed the courtroom, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not here to win a debate or to destroy my opponent, Karoline," she said. "I'm here to ask for a world where we can lift each other up, where we understand that our differences don't have to divide us, but can be a source of strength. We all want the same thing, a future where our children and grandchildren have a chance to live better lives than we did. But we won't get there by continuing to cling to a system that only benefits the few. We get there by listening, by understanding, and by putting people first." She paused for a moment, letting her words settle, feeling the weight of their importance. The courtroom was silent, and even Karoline, who had been bristling with frustration just moments before, couldn't bring herself to interrupt. Alexandria continued, the raw emotion in her voice softening but never losing its intensity. "Politics isn't a game to me. It's about people. It's about giving every person a fair shot, no matter where they come from, no matter how much money they have. I believe in the power of kindness, in the power of giving people opportunities to succeed. And if that means giving a little extra help to those who need it, then so be it. Karoline, for the first time in this entire debate, didn't know how to respond. The arguments she had prepared, the harsh words she had come armed with, seemed so empty now. Alexandria's voice had cut through the noise and reached into the heart of the issue, into the human element of it all. The judge, sensing that the moment was critical, turned to Karoline. "Do you have anything further to add, Ms. Leavitt?" For a brief moment, Karoline just sat there, her hands resting on the table, her mind racing. What could she say now? Alexandria had offered a vision of hope, of unity, and of compassion that felt stronger than anything she had ever argued for. She had no retort, no clever comeback. Only silence filled the space between them. Then, with a deep breath, Karoline stood. Her shoulders were stiff, and for the first time, her expression had softened. The fire that had burned within her now seemed to have dulled, and instead of her usual fiery rhetoric, she spoke in a tone that surprised everyone. "You're right," Karoline said quietly, her voice more measured than it had ever been before. "I've been so focused on what I think is right, on winning, that I forgot about the people we're supposed to be fighting for. Maybe I've been too caught up in protecting an old system that no longer works for most people." There was a pause in the room, as if the audience collectively exhaled. The words were unexpected, but they were the truth. Karoline wasn't just admitting defeat, she was acknowledging the possibility of change, the realization that Alexandria's vision might be worth considering. Alexandria, who had remained calm and collected throughout the exchange, nodded slowly. "It's never too late to change, Karoline," she said. "We can always choose a different path, a better one." And in that moment, something shifted. Karoline didn't have all the answers, and she didn't have a perfect solution. But for the first time, she was open to the idea of compromise, of finding common ground, of seeing beyond the divide. The judge, sensing the resolution of the debate, called for the final remarks. The audience sat on the edge of their seats, unsure of what would happen next. Karoline and Alexandria stood together, each understanding the significance of the moment. The battle in the courtroom had not been about who was right or wrong. It had been about understanding the deeper issues at play. It had been about listening to each other, even when it was uncomfortable. As the judge wrapped up the session, the applause in the courtroom was unexpected but genuine. Both women had won in their own ways. Alexandria had stuck to her ideals, her commitment to fairness and justice unshaken. Karoline had been forced to confront the limitations of her beliefs and had emerged with a new perspective. The country, watching from their screens, would remember this moment not as a victory for one side or the other, but as a turning point. A turning point where two opposing forces found a way to communicate, to truly listen, and to begin the work of building a better, more inclusive future. And for the first time, the country wasn't divided. They were united not in their agreement, but in their willingness to listen, to understand, and to grow together.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.